The lunch rush had just begun when the doorbell chimed, announcing the arrival of a stranger. The restaurant buzzed with chatter and clinking cutlery, a blend of sizzling oil and laughter filling the air. No one paid attention at first. Just another customer, they thought. But as the man stepped inside, something about him drew lingering glances. He was older, perhaps in his late 50s, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit that seemed too refined for the modest family restaurant. A sleek leather briefcase hung from his hand, polished shoes whispering across the tiled floor. His face was calm, unreadable, but his eyes searched the room with quiet curiosity. He paused at the entrance, waiting, perhaps for someone to greet him. When no one did, he offered a polite nod and made his way toward an empty table by the window. The waitress at the counter glanced at him, hesitating. He didn't seem like the usual crowd that came for burgers and fries. Maybe he was lost, or maybe he'd wandered in by mistake. Still, she grabbed a menu and approached him with a friendly smile. "Good afternoon, sir," she said brightly. "Table for one." The man blinked, tilting his head slightly. "Ah, konnichiwa," he replied in a soft voice. "Hattori desu." The waitress froze for a second, unsure. I'm sorry," she stammered. He smiled politely, gestured to himself, then held up one finger. She got the message and nodded quickly, placing the menu on the table. "Of course, one," she said, trying to sound confident. "I'll, be right back." As she walked away, he studied the room, the chalkboard specials, the framed photos of the town's festivals, the way sunlight painted warm patches on the floor. There was a quiet grace in the way he moved, as though he carried centuries of patience with him. When another waiter approached with a notepad, the man pointed to the menu, speaking carefully in Japanese, his tone respectful but unsure. The waiter blinked, confused. Sorry, sir. We don't have sushi here." The man frowned slightly, not out of annoyance but confusion. He gestured again, miming a cup to his lips. He only wanted tea. The waiter laughed awkwardly. "Tea? You mean, like, iced tea?" The man hesitated, then nodded, though his eyes suggested that wasn't quite right. When the waiter left, two nearby customers began whispering. "Maybe he doesn't speak English," one said. "You think he's a tourist?" The older man took out a small notepad from his briefcase and began writing something down, his neat handwriting filling the page. He looked up every so often, perhaps observing the people, perhaps just listening. There was an air of dignity about him, a kind of calm that didn't fit the flustered energy of the lunch crowd. At the counter, the waitress who had first greeted him watched quietly. Something tugged at her, a feeling that he wasn't just a lost traveler. There was purpose in the way he carried himself, a subtle gravity. Yet here he was, sitting alone in a noisy restaurant where no one understood a word he said. A moment later, the wrong drink arrived, iced tea with lemon. He thanked the waiter anyway, bowing slightly, and took a careful sip. His eyes flickered for just a second with surprise at the taste, then softened into an amused smile. No one noticed. They had already moved on, busy with orders and chatter, while the man sat in silence, surrounded by voices he couldn't comprehend. And still, he waited. The restaurant's warmth began to fade for him, replaced by the chill of misunderstanding. He had hoped for a simple lunch, a quiet meal before his next meeting, but the small confusion over tea had turned into something larger. Every attempt to communicate felt like pushing through fog. The waiter had returned twice. Already. Once with the wrong drink, and then again to confirm an order the man had never truly made. The poor communication had left both of them smiling awkwardly, both pretending everything was fine. At the next table, a group of office workers were finishing their meals. One of them glanced at the Japanese man and whispered something that made the others laugh softly. It wasn't cruel, but it was careless. The man heard the tone and lowered his eyes, pretending not to notice. He opened his notepad again and began to draw, a habit he had picked up years ago when business meetings grew dull. The pencil moved with graceful precision, shaping the outline of a teacup, a chair, the corner of a window. Each line steadied his patience. The waitress from before passed by his table, pausing for a second as she saw the sketch. She wanted to say something but hesitated. The manager had just stepped out from the back, already frowning. "What's going on with that guy?" he asked the staff in a low voice. He's been sitting there forever. Did he order yet? Not really, one of the waiters replied. He just keeps talking in Japanese or something. I can't make sense of it. Maybe he's one of those picky tourists. The manager sighed. We can't have someone holding up a table during lunch rush. Try to get his order again, or politely ask him to come back later. The words hung heavy in the air. The waitress frowned. She didn't like the idea. Something about it felt wrong, even unfair. Still, the waiter obeyed and returned to the man's table. Sir, he began, voice firm but polite, we're kind of busy right now. Maybe. You could come back when it's less crowded. The Japanese man looked up, startled. He didn't understand the words, but he could hear the tone, see the body language. He set his pencil down carefully, confusion crossing his face. Sumimasen, he said quietly. Watashi wa tadachuman o shite dezu. He bowed slightly, his voice soft, almost apologetic. The waiter shrugged helplessly. I'm sorry, I don't understand, sir. Maybe later, okay. The laughter from the nearby table returned, slightly louder this time. The man straightened his posture and nodded politely, though a flicker of disappointment passed through his eyes. He gathered his things slowly, preparing to leave. Across the room, the young waitress watched the scene unfold. She could feel the tension building. Something about the man's expression tugged at her chest. She recognized the way his eyes softened when people misunderstood him. It wasn't anger or pride. It was loneliness. The manager sighed again. This is getting awkward, he muttered, already turning back toward the kitchen. The staff went back to their tasks, pretending not to notice as the man placed a few coins on the table for the tea he hadn't asked for. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and bowed slightly toward the staff before turning to leave. But for a brief moment, his gaze lingered on the handwritten menu by the counter. The faintest smile appeared, as if he saw something beautiful even in confusion. And then, just as he took his first step toward the door, a gentle voice called out, hesitant, careful, but familiar in its rhythm. Sumimasen, chato mat kudasai. The man froze. Someone had spoken Japanese. The words seemed to ripple through the air like a gentle wind, stopping him mid-step. For the first time since he had entered, he turned with visible surprise. The young waitress stood near the counter, her face a mixture of nervousness and determination. She took a hesitant step closer, her tray still in hand, and repeated herself softly, her pronunciation careful but natural. Sumimasen, she said again, her tone respectful. The man's eyes widened, his features softening into disbelief. He asked, his voice almost a whisper. She nodded, smiling shyly. She replied, Demo. A wave of relief washed over his face, and he let out a small, grateful laugh, quiet, refined, but full of warmth. The other staff members exchanged puzzled glances. The chatter in the restaurant dulled as a few customers turned to watch, curious. The young waitress didn't notice. Her attention was completely on him. He gestured toward the menu, speaking softly in Japanese, explaining that he was looking for something light to eat, perhaps a simple soup and rice if possible. She listened carefully, nodding as he spoke, repeating a few words to make sure she understood. Then she smiled and said, I can ask the kitchen to make something special for you. Please wait a moment. As she turned to leave, he called out, Arigato, truly, thank you. His voice carried genuine gratitude. Behind the counter, the manager approached, confused. What's going on? What did he say? The waitress wiped her hands on her apron and explained quickly, he just wants a light meal, something simple. He's not causing trouble, he just couldn't communicate before. The manager blinked, a little embarrassed. Oh, I thought he was. Well, never mind. Go ahead. When she returned to his table, she brought warm miso soup, a bowl of rice, and a small side of vegetables the kitchen had managed to put together. It wasn't on the menu, but it looked comforting and home-cooked. The man's face lit up when he saw it. He pressed his hands together in a small bow of thanks. Itadakimasu, he said, and began eating slowly, reverently. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if his calm presence demanded respect. The waitress stood nearby, unsure whether to leave or stay. She noticed the small details now, how he placed his chopsticks neatly across the bowl, how he paused between bites as though savoring not just the food but the peace of being understood. "You speak very well," he said in Japanese after a few minutes, his accent precise and gentle. "Where did you learn?" "My grandmother," she replied with a soft laugh. "She lived in Osaka when she was young. I only know a little, but enough to help sometimes." He smiled, nodding approvingly. "It is more than enough. Today, you have helped me a great deal." Something shifted in the atmosphere. The same customers who had laughed earlier now watched quietly, a bit ashamed of their assumptions. The staff seemed gentler, their voices softer. It was as though her few words of Japanese had translated more than language, it had translated dignity. When he finished eating, he stood and bowed deeply to her, both hands pressed to his sides. She returned the bow, smiling shyly again, not realizing that this small act of kindness had changed everything that would follow. The next morning, the restaurant felt different. The sunlight seemed warmer, spilling through the wide front windows and painting golden shapes across the tables. The staff moved about in their usual rhythm, but there was an unspoken quiet among them, a shared awareness that something about the day before had lingered. The waitress, however, didn't think much of it. She had chalked it up as a simple act of kindness, helping a man who needed it. After all, that was part of her job. She was wiping down a table when the manager walked out from the back, holding an envelope in his hand. "Hey," he called, his voice tinged with curiosity, "did you serve that Japanese gentleman yesterday?" She turned, confused. "Yes, why?" He held up the envelope. "This came in early this morning. A courier dropped it off. It's addressed to you." Her brows furrowed. "To me." She took it carefully, the paper thick and elegant, her name handwritten in neat, flowing letters. On the back, a wax seal pressed with a delicate crest. Her hands trembled slightly as she broke it open. Inside was a folded letter and a small white card. The letter was written in English, in a graceful, deliberate hand. "Greater than, dear Miss. I wish to thank you again for your kindness and understanding yesterday. Though I could not express it well at the time, your respect and patience touched me deeply. I am not merely a traveler, but an investor visiting your country in search of partners who value sincerity above profit. Yesterday, I found what I was looking for, not in a meeting room, but in a simple restaurant. Please accept my card. I would like to meet you again to discuss an opportunity that I believe you deserve. With gratitude, Takahashi Kenji." She reread the name. Her heart skipped. The name sounded familiar. She remembered it from an article her brother had shown her months ago. Takahashi Kenji, a Japanese entrepreneur known for revitalizing small, family-owned restaurants across Asia. The others gathered around, reading over her shoulder. "You're kidding," one of the waiters whispered. "That guy yesterday, the one we thought couldn't order tea." The manager rubbed the back of his neck, looking sheepish. "We might have made a mistake." The waitress didn't speak. Her eyes stayed fixed on the card, simple white, embossed with gold letters. Beneath his name were words that made her breath catch. Founder, Takahashi Group International Dining. She could hardly believe it. Her simple attempt to help someone had somehow crossed paths with a man who could change her entire future. A week later, she met him again, this time in a quiet hotel cafe overlooking the river. He greeted her warmly, bowing with the same grace as before. They spoke for an hour, switching easily between English and Japanese. By the end of the meeting, he handed her a letter of offer, a position as assistant manager for his upcoming international restaurant branch in the city. When she returned to her old workplace to give notice, the staff applauded her. Even the manager smiled proudly. The story of the Japanese millionaire no one understood spread quietly through town, a reminder of how small acts of respect could ripple far beyond what anyone expected. And every time she thought of that day, she remembered the moment he had smiled in relief, the sound of his gentle laugh, and the simple truth she had learned: kindness needs no translation.